In the room hangs briefly in the air. In the room hangs briefly in the air before fading. How did an entire household lie down at night and remain there until morning? The fire is at its best in the early evening. This is the hour when it feels possible, when the coals are deep and fully established, built up after the midday meal and tended carefully through the afternoon, the bed of them orange and red and quietly alive as the draught moves through. The warmth reaches the bench where the household sits, touching faces and hands directly, convincing you for a little while that the room can be held against the cold outside. But this is the warmest it will be all night. The room is not warm. The room is warmer than it was this morning. The fire has been going for hours, and the walls and the floor have absorbed some of what the fire put out and are releasing it slowly. But the room is not warm in the way of a room with windows sealed against the weather and walls built thick enough to hold the heat. The room is the temperature of a room with a good fire going on one side of it and a February night pressing in on every other side, a temperature that is the compromise between the two, the warmth winning within a few feet of the hearth and the cold winning everywhere else. You sit close to the fire. Everyone sits close to the fire in the evening. The household arranged around the hearth in the last hours of the day is the household in its most domestic configuration. The bench pulled near, the stools pulled near, the children on the floor between the adults, and the fire doing their particular version of the evening, which is the version that involves being as close to the warmth as the adults will permit, and closer when the adults are not paying attention. The fire draws people the way food draws people, with the same directness, the same pre-verbal pull, the same animal certainty that this is where the body should be. The work of the evening is the work that can be done by firelight. The spinning in the hands of the woman whose distaff is always nearby, the wool or the flax twisting from her fingers onto the spindle, with the practiced continuity of someone who has been doing this since childhood and can do it without looking. The hands knowing the motion, the way hands know all the motions they were taught young. The mending, the work boot that needs new stitching, the blanket corner that has frayed, the child's sleeve that tore on something in the yard and has been waiting since this morning. The knife work, the sharpening, and the small carving, the bits and pieces of the household's maintenance that can be done sitting down in the evening's light. The firelight is the only light. This is the thing about the evening in this house that changes everything about how the evening is experienced. The single source of light is also the source of warmth, and both of them have limits. The fire's light extends a certain distance from the hearth and then fails. The room beyond the fire's radius falling into a dark that is not the dark of a room with curtains drawn against the evening, but the dark of a room whose only light is going away from you as you move away from it. You do not move away from it. In the evening, in winter, the household lives within the fire's radius, the circle of warmth and light that is the inhabited world of the winter evening. Outside that circle, the cold and the dark of the room, and beyond the room the cold and the dark of the night. The children begin to slow. The signs are always the same. The younger ones first, their eyes going heavy against their will, the nodding and the jerking upright and the nodding again, the specific battle of a tired child against sleep that is one of the most reliable certainties of the evening. The older children hold out longer, the age difference visible in the quality of the resistance. The older child's will to stay with the adults and the fire and the light being stronger than the younger child's capacity to override the body's demand. Eventually they are put to bed. The putting to bed of the children on a winter night is its own operation. The transition from the warm circle of the fire to the bed that is somewhere colder, made as quickly as the logistics allow. The child lifted or led, the shoes pulled off, the outer layer removed or not removed depending on how cold the room is, and whether the child has already half fallen asleep and will be more trouble to undress than to leave dressed. The covers pulled up to the chin, the child tucked. The tucking matters. The tuck is not decorative. The tuck is the sealing of the warm envelope around the child's body, the closing of the gaps through which the cold will find its way if given the opportunity, the compression of the blanket's edges against the mattress so the draft that comes along the floor in the night cannot get underneath. A good tuck on a cold night is the difference between the child who wakes at 3 in the morning cold and uncomfortable and the child who sleeps through to morning. The hands that tuck have done this before. They know the method. The house quiets. With the children in the bed, the fire's conversation drops to the lower register of the evening's last hour. The two adults by the fire, the quiet work continuing, the fire going down slightly as the last logs burn, and the decision approaches of whether to add one more piece of wood or to begin the banking. The banking means sleep. Adding wood means another half hour of warmth and firelight and the work of the evening. In the depth of winter, with the cold pressing in from everywhere and the morning's work already a known quantity, the decision usually comes earlier than it would in autumn or spring. The last piece of wood burns. The banking begins. This is a ritual as practiced and as specific as any other in the household's day, the end of the evening ritual that has been done in this same sequence, or one very like it, by every household in this village for as long as there have been households in this village. You take the poker and you rake the coals, the live coals, the orange and red of them, moved from the edges of the hearth to the center, gathered into a mound that is high enough to retain heat at its core, but not so high that the air cannot circulate through it. Then the ash, the grey ash of today's burning, shoveled from the edges, where it has accumulated, and placed over the coal mound carefully, a layer deep enough to insulate and slow the burning, but thin enough to allow the slow seep of air that will keep the coals alive. You look at what you have made. The banked fire is a grey mound with no flame, no visible glow, nothing that looks like a fire at all. It looks like the end of fire, like what fire becomes when it is over. But it is not over. Inside the grey dome of ash, the coals are still burning, still producing heat, still alive in the specific sense that fire is alive, requiring air, producing light and heat in their slow surrender to oxidation, maintaining the chain reaction that has been going since the fire was first lit this morning. The ash does not put the fire out. The ash is the fire's insulation against itself, the protection of the coal's heat against the very air that would accelerate it into ash. The fire will be there in the morning. Probably. The last task is the shuttering. The wooden shutters pulled across the window, the bar dropped into its slot, the gap at the bottom of the door assessed, and the draught roll, a length of cloth stuffed with straw, pushed against it, the cold held at every threshold. The house sealed as well as it can be sealed, which is not perfectly, the cold finding its way through the thatch and the daub, and the shuttered window, and the door's ill-fitting frame, but imperfectly enough to matter, the ceiling reducing the cold's ingress to what leaks through rather than what floods through. Then the bed. The cold wakes you before anything else does, not as a sound, not as a discomfort you have been gradually accumulating toward, but as a presence, specific, immediate, unmistakable. The cold of a winter room at the deepest point of the night, when the fire banked 6 hours ago has given almost everything it has to give, and the room has arrived at its own temperature, which is the temperature of February, which is not much above freezing. It is inside the bed covers with you. It is in the air when you breathe. It is in the tips of your fingers and the end of your nose and along the back of your neck where the covers have slipped and the air from the room has reached the skin and made its claim. You pull the covers higher. This is the first act of winter sleep, as it has always been the first act, as it will be every night until the season turns. The negotiation with the covers, the arranging and the rearranging, the tucking against the draft that comes from the wall at the head of the bed, or the gap at the side where the blanket hasn't quite reached. The covers are your whole technology against the cold tonight. There is nothing else. The fire is a low pulse in the hearth across the room, the banked coals producing heat still, but less heat, the warmth of it falling short of the bed by a body's length, the space between the hearth and where you sleep, a territory the cold has reclaimed through the hours. You burrow. This too is specific. This is not the burrowing of a person who is merely comfortable and getting more so. This is the burrowing of a body, making itself smaller, drawing the limbs in, curling the knees toward the chest, tucking the chin down, maximizing the amount of body that is in contact with the warm pocket of air that the body itself has been generating under the covers since you lay down. That pocket is warm. That pocket is the warmth of your own metabolic heat, the warmth of the body that has been burning its fuel through the night at the slow rate of rest, producing the heat of its own functioning and trapping it here, between the layers, in the air you have warmed by sleeping in it for 6 hours. The pocket is home. Outside the pocket is the room, which is what February is. You know this without opening your eyes, without measuring, without reasoning about it. The body knows it the way the body knows everything about the conditions of sleep, directly, immediately, through the skin's report of the air temperature, through the lungs' report of each breath, through the sensation of the nose and the cheek above the covers. The room is cold. The pocket is warm. The negotiation between them is the whole of winter sleep. In the bed beside you, another body. This is not incidental to the warmth. This is not a coincidence of the household sleeping arrangements or an expression of closeness, unrelated to the practical question of heat. This is heat. The body beside you is producing warmth at the same slow nighttime rate as your own body, and the two warmths together are considerably more than either alone would be, and the covers that trap both warmths in the same enclosed space give the bed an advantage over a bed with one person in it. That is, in the terms of a winter night, significant. The family does not sleep alone. This is perhaps the most fundamental thing about sleep in this house in this season. The sleeping arrangements are collective in a way that is not only cultural but physical, not only customary but necessary. The children are in the bed or near it, tucked against the adults, nested into the warmth of the group sleep, in the arrangement that gives the smallest and the least insulated bodies the most protection. The parents are on the outside, the children against the wall or between the adults. The distribution of bodies in the bed, a practical hierarchy of warmth need. The infant if there is an infant, is in the cradle pulled close to the hearth, as close as safety allows, the warmth of the barely banked fire, its primary protection through the night. The dog is at the foot of the bed. This, too, is warmth. The dog is not merely a companion animal tolerated in the sleeping space as a sentimental concession. The dog is a heat source, a living warm body adding its metabolic output to the bed's microclimate. The heavy weight of it at the foot of the bed, a thing you have slept against so long you would notice its absence as a cold spot, a gap in the warmth architecture of the night. In some households there are more animals, the cat on the bed or on the chest nearby, the pig in the house itself on the coldest nights, brought inside from its sty so it does not freeze, its considerable body heat warming the floor of the room, whether or not anyone is aware of this as a strategy. The breath of animals is warmth. The breath of people is warmth. In a house with a large family and the animals brought in against the cold, the combined exhalation of all those living bodies produces a moisture and a warmth that raises the temperature of the room above what the stone or the timber or the thin walls alone would hold. The house is a body in this sense, a vessel for the heat of the lives it contains, the walls and the thatch and the shuttered windows doing their imperfect best to keep that heat inside, the cold pressing in from every side and being held at bay by the accumulated warmth of breathing, sleeping, living things. The thatch does more than it is given credit for. This is the thing about the materials of the medieval house that is most easy to underestimate from a distance. The insulating properties of a thick thatched roof are considerable. The straw, laid in layers deep enough to shed rain, traps air between its fibers the way a down blanket traps air between its own. And trapped air is insulation. And insulation is the difference between a room that loses its warmth in 2 hours and a room that loses it in 6. The thatch does not prevent heat loss. Nothing in this house prevents heat loss. But the thatch slows it, and slowing it through the night is sufficient. Sufficient to reach morning with the fire-banked coals still alive. Sufficient to reach morning with the bodies in the bed still warm enough to sleep. Sufficient to reach morning and begin again. The walls are a different matter. Stone walls and the thin daub and wattle walls of the poorer household both conduct cold in ways that thatch does not. The cold travels through solid material more readily than through layered air, and the wall on the north side of the room in February is the north wind's ambassador, carrying its cold inward through the thickness of the material and delivering it to the air of the room. Against this, the household has its hanging, a piece of woven cloth or a cured animal skin, or simply a layer of straw packed between the inner face of the wall and a lattice of sticks, the roughest possible insulation, but better than nothing. Better than the bare stone face of the wall breathing February directly into the room. You are not cold yet, not really cold. Cold at the margins, the nose, the ears, the fingers, but the core of you, tucked under the layers, is warm enough. This is what survival requires, the core. The extremities can manage cold better than the core can, the body's own triage sending more blood to the organs when the temperature drops and less to the fingers and the toes, sacrificing the periphery to defend the center. The fingers at the edges of the covers are cold in February. They are always cold in February. The chest is warm, the belly is warm, the back pressed against the warm back of the body beside you is warm, and this warm center is the thing that matters, the thing that the whole arrangement of the night, the covers, the companion, the dog, the thatch, the banked fire is designed to protect. There are layers. This deserves attention. The layers, because the layers are the primary technology of winter sleep, and because they are not simple. The bed in a household with any means at all is not a single blanket on a straw tick. It is a system. The straw tick itself, the mattress stuffed with straw or hay, or in better households wool or feathers, provides the base layer, the separation from the cold boards of the bedstead that is as important as anything above. Cold comes from below as readily as from above. The body lying on a cold surface loses heat to that surface as efficiently as it loses it to the cold air, and the tick stuffed with material that traps air is doing the same work on the underside as the covers are doing on top. Then the sheets, if there are sheets, linen sheets in the households that have them, the linen woven during the long winter evenings by the women of the house from the flax that was retted and hackled and spun in the months before, the cloth coarse by fine standards but smooth against the skin and effective at the job of containing the body's heat. The sheet is a layer. Every layer counts. The sheet's contribution is modest but real, the additional layer of trapped air between it and the body above, adding its small portion to the warmth budget of the bed. Then the blankets. The blankets are wool, woven in the heavy weight that winter requires, and they are as many as the household can manage. One household has 3, another has 5. The number a direct reflection of the household's prosperity, because blankets are not free. Blankets are the product of sheep raised and shorn, and the fleece cleaned and combed and spun and woven, the labor of months compressed into a rectangle of cloth that will be used every night for 20 years. A wealthy household has more blankets than it needs. A poor household has fewer blankets than it needs and compensates with everything else. More bodies in the bed, more clothing worn to bed, more trust placed in the fire's embers, making it through to morning. In the wealthy household, the bed is itself different. The bed in the manor house or the merchant's hall is not the sleeping platform of the peasant household, not the boards and the straw tick and the borrowed blankets. It is a structure, a piece of furniture as substantial as any other in the room, with posts at the 4 corners and rails connecting them, and from the rails the curtains hanging, the curtains that are the wealthy household's great technological advantage over every household without them. The bed curtains hang on all 4 sides, and they pull closed at night, and when they are closed, the bed becomes its own room, its own enclosed space, with its own microclimate. The warmth generated by the bodies inside it, trapped not just by the covers, but by the curtains as well. The 4-sided enclosure creating a still airspace between the sleepers and the cold of the room that is considerably more effective than covers alone. The curtained bed is a room within a room. The air inside the curtains, warmed by the bodies sleeping within them, stays warmer than the air outside the curtains by a margin that makes the difference between a comfortable night and the night you are having. Manageable cold versus cold that requires constant management. The wealthy household sleeps more warmly, not only because it has more wool and more fuel, but because its bed is designed to hold warmth, the curtains functioning as walls and the canopy above as a ceiling, the whole structure engineering a sleep environment that is, within its own small dimensions, considerably less cold than the room surrounding it. The wealthy household also heats its bedroom, not with the open hearth of the main hall, but with a smaller fire. The fireplace set into the wall of the chamber above, the chimney drawing the smoke up and out rather than letting it pool in the room. The fire sized for a bedchamber rather than a hall, and therefore burning through the night without requiring banking, tended by a servant whose sleeping place is in the room or just outside it for this purpose. The bedchamber fire does not bank. The bedchamber fire burns all night, its warmth supplementing the curtains and the covers, the wealthy sleeper drifting from one sleep to the next in conditions that are warm enough that the cold is a distant presence rather than a pressing one. You do not have curtains. You have the blankets and the bodies and the dog and the banked fire, and these are what you have always had, and they have always been sufficient in the sense that you are here. The household is here. The cold has been survived again, and will be survived again tonight. The curtained bed of the manor is not a thing you lack, in the way you lack something you once had and lost. It is simply a condition of a different life, the life at a different place in the arrangement of things, a life with different resources applied to the same problem. The problem is the same for everyone. February. The clothing worn to bed is its own layer. This is another thing that is easy to overlook. In this house, in this winter, no one undresses to sleep. Or rather, no one undresses very much. The linen shift that is the base garment of the day is also the garment of the night, and over it in the coldest months goes additional wool. The stockings kept on, the coif kept on the head of the woman who has worn it all day, and will wear it tomorrow when she rises. The extra layer of the outer tunic that is the concession to the depth of winter. The acknowledgement that the body needs its own insulation, as well as the beds. The head in particular. A significant portion of the body's heat loss happens through the top of the skull, and the cap or coif worn to bed is not a fashion statement, but a practical intervention, the small garment keeping in what the cold would otherwise take. The children sleep in their day clothes. They always sleep in their day clothes in winter. They are dressed when they lie down and dressed when they rise, the distinction between day and night existing in this house more as a distinction between activity and rest than as a distinction between garments. The child pulled from the warm bed in the morning is already dressed for the cold room, already wearing everything that will be worn today. The transition from horizontal to vertical, the only change the morning requires of the clothing. The fire. The fire is the center of everything, and it is also, through the night, the fire that is not there. This is the paradox of winter sleeping. The fire that is the house's source of warmth must be reduced for the night, must be banked and covered so it does not burn through its fuel before morning, must be managed to last rather than managed to warm. The roaring fire of the evening, the fire you sat beside for the last hours of the day with the household around it, the fire under which the pottage was made and the water was heated, and the work of the winter evening, the spinning, the mending, the whittling, was done by its light. That fire is not the fire of the sleeping hours. The fire of the sleeping hours is a question asked into the dark. Will you still be there in the morning? Will there be enough left of you to catch the fresh wood and grow again? The banking of the fire is itself a practice. You do not simply let it die. You do not simply add wood and leave it burning. You rake the coals into a mound at the center of the hearth. You cover them with ash from the day's burning, and you do this carefully, with a knowledge of your specific fire and your specific hearth. That is the accumulated knowledge of 100 winters of banking it the same way, the knowledge of how deep the ash must be, and how high the coal mound, and how close to the edges of the stone, to ensure the draught comes from the right direction. A fire banked well will hold its coals alive through 6 hours. A fire banked poorly will be dead by 3 in the morning. And a dead fire in February is a different kind of morning than a living fire, the room colder by degrees that the body counts even in sleep. When the fire is dead, the room arrives at its own temperature, and the room's own temperature in February, in a stone or timber house with thatch and shuttered windows, but no glazing, no double walls, no insulation beyond what the materials naturally provide. The room's own temperature in February is cold. Not lethal cold. The house is not a barn. The bodies in it are not exposed to the wind. The thatch is holding what it holds, and the walls are holding what they hold. But genuinely cold. The kind of cold that you feel through the blankets, that reaches your nose when you breathe, that is in the air you exhale, and that comes back to you from the cold air above the covers. You have learned to sleep in this. This is the thing that is perhaps most striking about winter sleep in this house. It is not a matter of enduring an impossible condition, but of having grown up in a condition and learned it the way you learn everything about the place and time you were born into, from the inside, through the body's own adaptation, through the gradual calibration of what is bearable and what is not, of what the night requires and what the night provides. A person raised in a warm house cannot sleep in this cold without discomfort, without waking, without the body's alarm responses activating at temperatures the adapted body accepts as ordinary. The shivering that a modern person might experience at the first contact with an unheated February room is the body doing its job, generating heat through muscle activation when the external temperature drops below the threshold. But it is the body doing a job that need not be done if the threshold has been set. Differently, if the body grew up understanding 15 degrees as the expected nighttime temperature and 5 degrees as the cold that requires management rather than panic. Your body grew up here. Your body knows this cold. Your body does not panic at this cold. Your body has been managing this cold from the first winter it was alive, has been adjusting its baseline, calibrating its responses, learning the particular character of this house in this season, in the same way it learned the particular character of the work and the food and the rhythms of the day. The cold is a condition you inhabit, not a condition that happens to you. The first sleep. This is another thing. The night is not a single uninterrupted sleep. The night is 2 sleeps, with a waking between them. The first sleep and the second sleep, with an interval of perhaps an hour in the middle of the night, that is the household's own private time. The quiet hours between the 2 halves of the night, when some members of the household may lie awake and think, or speak quietly to the person beside them, or rise to tend the fire, or pray, or do the small tasks that can be done in the dark without light, the checking of the baby, the adjustment of the covers, the visit to the cold outside that the body requires. The first sleep is the deep one. It begins not long after dark, or long after dark by the season. In November, dark comes early, and the first sleep begins early. In January, dark comes at its darkest, and the first sleep in the longest nights may begin before the evening meal is fully settled in the stomach, the body pulling toward rest in the way it pulls toward warmth, with the same direct animal instinct. You lie down when the fire is banked and the work is done, and the light is gone, and the household has nothing left to do but lie down. And the sleep that comes is the sleep of a body that has been working since before dawn on a diet of rye bread and pottage, and has now arrived at the end of the day, and is prepared to give itself to the dark completely. You sleep with a completeness that the modern sleeper does not sleep with. This is not romanticization. It is the observation that a body which has been outdoors in cold weather doing hard physical labor for 10 to 12 hours arrives at horizontal with a specific relationship to sleep, that a body which has been sitting in a warm room doing sedentary work does not arrive with. The tiredness is total. The tiredness is in every limb, in the jaw from the chewing of the bread, in the hands from the work of the day, in the back from the bending of the field, or the fireside, or wherever the day's work was done. This tiredness is the first sleep's great provider. It carries the body down quickly, pulls it below the surface of consciousness before the cold has had time to register, before the discomfort of the straw tick and the weight of the covers and the temperature of the room have time to become obstacles. The body goes down like a stone. The waking between the sleeps comes in the deep of the night, in the hour after midnight, arriving not as an alarm, but as a natural surfacing from a completed cycle of sleep, the body having done what it needed to do in the first half of the night, and returning now to a lighter state, lying in the dark in a condition that is not sleep, and not full wakefulness, but the narrow country between them, the mind available but not urgent, the body rested but not ready to rise. This is the interval. In this interval the household is quiet around you. The breathing of the people in the bed is the breathing of people in the first or second stage of sleep, the slow, regular breathing of the soundly asleep, the slightly faster breathing of someone who has woken as you have woken and is lying in the same quiet state. You can hear the fire if there is anything left in it, the occasional tiny sound of a coal settling, the faint warmth of it reaching you across the room as a slightly different quality of air rather than as actual warmth. You can hear the wind if there is wind, the sound of it in the thatch above you and around the shuttered window and in the gap under the door where the draught comes through on the worst nights. You can hear the cold. You cannot hear cold exactly. Cold makes no sound, but you can hear what the cold has done. The creak of the timber as the house contracts further in the night, the sound of the frozen puddle in the yard cracking, the particular silence of a world that is too cold for the ordinary night sounds. The owls quieter in very deep cold, the fox quieter, the house itself quieter. You lie in the warm pocket. This interval is yours in a way that the two sleeps are not. The first sleep belongs to the tiredness, the second sleep belongs to the coming day. But this hour between them belongs to no one and nothing, and can be used in any way the mind inclines. Some people pray in this interval, the night office of the household that is not the formal liturgy of the monastery, but the personal, unprescribed prayer of someone lying in the dark with time on their hands and the world quiet around them. Some people think through the problems of the household, the accounting that is always ongoing, the barrel of pottage peas assessed against the weeks remaining, the rye in the storage pit measured against the flour needed, the animals in the yard checked against the hay in the barn. Some people talk, quietly, to the person beside them, the darkness giving a particular quality to nighttime conversation that the day does not have, the intimacy of two people side by side in the dark speaking in low voices so as not to wake the children. The dark is complete. There is no light in the room unless the fire has made it through with enough life to produce a faint glow, and even then the glow is barely light. Barely enough to see the shape of the room, the vague form of the chest against the wall, the outline of the children in the bed. No candle, no rushlight. The candle that was burned in the evening was extinguished when the household lay down, the tallow too precious to burn through the night for a light that sleeping bodies do not need. The dark of this room at this hour is the dark of before lamps, the dark that the human eye cannot penetrate, the dark that the human mind navigates not with sight, but with the knowledge of where things are, the spatial memory that maps the room so completely that you can move through it without light. In the dark you know exactly where you are. You know the wall behind you and the distance to the door and the angle of the hearth from where you lie. You know the sound of each child's breathing and which breathing belongs to which child. You know the sounds of the house, the settling of the timbers, the intermittent sound of the thatch when the wind moves through it, the specific creak of the door when the draught moves it on its hinges. All of this is your household's particular soundscape, as known and as readable as a face, and the interval between the sleeps is the time when you are most available to hear it, most awake to the world as it is at this hour, this time, this depth of the winter night. The mind does its own work in the interval, not the directed work of the waking day, not the problem-solving and the planning and the decision-making of daylight hours. Something less structured. The mind turns over the day that has passed and the day that is coming in the unfocused way of a mind that is not quite awake, associating rather than reasoning. The images and the sensations of the day available without being called. The smell of the morning bread and the sound of the axe in the frozen wood, and the weight of the tool in the hand and the face of the child at noon, all present without sequence, without the narrative that the waking mind would impose on them. This is its own kind of rest, not the rest of sleep, which is different, which is the rest of withdrawal from consciousness entirely. The rest of the interval is the rest of a mind that is still here, still available, but not being asked to do anything in particular, not being given a task, not being held to the discipline of the working day. In this hour, the mind is its own, wandering through the landscape of the day and the night without direction, occasionally landing on something worth attending to, the worry about the cow in the yard who was off her food yesterday, the exchange with the neighbor that ended without resolution, and then moving on. Some nights the worry stays. Some nights one of the things the mind lands on in the interval does not release you back into the second sleep, but holds you there in the dark. The specific anxiety of the winter household, the stores, the weather, the child who has been coughing since last week, pulling you into a wakefulness that is neither the peace of sleep nor the usefulness of full consciousness, but the uncomfortable country between them, lying in the dark with the cold doing its work and the worry doing its work, and neither of them finished. You wait it out. The worry does not resolve in the interval. It rarely resolves in the interval. The interval is not the right time for resolution. The interval is too dark and too quiet, and the thinking done in it is the wrong kind of thinking for resolution. You lie in the dark, and you let the worry have its time, and then you let it pass, the way everything passes in the long dark of the winter night, the way the cold itself passes eventually, not quickly, not fully, but enough. Enough to sleep again. enough to reach the morning. The fire needs tending. This is often the reason for rising in the interval, or one of the reasons. The fire that was banked 6 hours ago needs to know if it has made it through. You lift the covers, and the cold of the room replaces the warmth of the pocket immediately, the body contracting against the shock of it, the feet finding the cold floor and the legs straightening, and the hands reaching for the wool that was left nearby for exactly this possibility, the getting up garment, the extra layer added before the feet find the cold floor in the middle of the night. The floor is very cold. The stone floor of the kitchen area, or the packed earth floor of the main room, or the wooden boards of the upper rooms in the better house, all of them are cold at this hour. All of them the temperature of the ground, which is the temperature of the season, which in February is the temperature that the body's feet register as requiring quick passage across. You move to the fire quickly, you crouch, and you look at what the coals are doing. You assess the ash and the embers with the knowledge of someone who has looked at this fire in this state many times and knows what it means. If the fire has lived, you add wood carefully. Not much. A small piece, a split of dry wood that will catch quickly on the coals and burn for an hour, returning the room to the warmth it had earlier in the night, before the covers are pulled back over you in the second sleep. You watch it catch, the small tongue of flame finding the wood, hesitating, steadying, and then you return to the bed, and you get back under the covers, and you wait while the cold of the room warms slightly, while the fire does its hour's work, while your body returns to the temperature of the pocket. The second sleep is different from the first. The first sleep was the sleep of exhaustion, pulled under by the body's complete spending of itself. The second sleep is lighter, more conscious. The body rested from the first sleep and the interval, and now settling back into sleep with awareness of the settling, the way you feel yourself going rather than simply going. The cold is part of this second sleep. In a way, it was not part of the first. The first sleep went too deep, too fast for the cold to register. But the second sleep is in a layer closer to the surface, where the cold can reach you, where the temperature of the room is available to the sleeping mind as a condition, a presence, a thing being managed, even in the not quite waking state. You sleep in layers. This is the phrase for it, the sleep of the cold house. Sleep in layers, where the deepest layers are the warmest and most unconscious, and the shallower layers are more aware, the mind available to the temperature at the body's edges, tracking the cold the way a sleeping animal tracks danger. You are not fully asleep in the way of the first sleep. You are somewhere in the middle layers, the body resting but the thermoregulation still active, the covers being adjusted without full consciousness, the curl of the body tightening against the cold without the deliberate decision to curl. This is the body's competence. Not intelligence, not planning, not the deliberate management of a person who has reasoned through their situation and taken action. The competence of the sleeping body in the cold is the competence of an organism that has been doing this for a very long time, much longer than any individual life, longer than the tradition that built this house and banked this fire and wove these blankets. The body that manages cold in sleep is managing it with tools that are older than fire, older than thatch, older than any human technology. The curl, the metabolic adjustment, the vasoconstriction at the periphery to defend the core, the particular quality of sleep that is lighter in the coldest hours and deepest in the warmest, the body rationing its own attention across the night in ways it does not require you to authorize. The children sleep through it. The children, whose bodies are in many ways less efficient at thermoregulation than adult bodies, who have a higher surface area relative to their mass, who lose heat faster, who are more vulnerable to the cold at the extremes, sleep through it nonetheless. Not because they are hardy in some moral sense, but because they are pressed against the warm body of a parent, because the arrangement of the bed puts their vulnerable smallness inside the warmth architecture of the larger bodies, because the covers are piled on them more than on the adults, because the adults have placed them between wall and warmth and taken the outer positions where the cold reaches first. The parent at the outside edge of the bed is the coldest person in it. This is the physics of warmth sharing, understood without physics, practiced without theory. The body that gives most of its warmth to the smaller bodies beside it is the coldest body, the body with the exposed side open to the room, the one that has given up the protected position to the child. The parent does not reason about this. The parent does not know it as a principle. The parent has always slept this way, was probably sleeping this way inside their own parent's warmth when they were the child in the interior position, and will sleep this way as long as there are children in the bed who need the interior. The dog shifts. The dog at the foot of the bed shifts its weight and resettles, and its warmth redistributes, and the feet that were against its flank feel a brief cooling, and then find the new warmth of its different surface and settle against that. You are barely aware of this. The body at the surface layer of sleep is aware of it in the way it is aware of the fire going down, as a temperature change, as a slight adjustment required, as something noticed and acted on before the full mind is consulted. The covers are tucked. The knees are drawn up. The dog's warmth is reclaimed. The night goes on. The night in February is long. From the banking of the fire in the early evening to the first grey light in the east that signals the approach of dawn, the night in February is perhaps 11 hours. 11 hours in the cold dark of the house with the fire going down, and the bodies gathered against it, and the world outside locked in the season's grip. 11 hours is a long time to sleep, and the medieval household does not sleep all of them. The interval in the middle of the night, the fire tending, the occasional disturbance of a child or an animal, the moments of waking and settling back. These take perhaps 2 hours of the 11, leaving 9 hours of sleep in 2 pieces, which is more sleep than the summer allows, and more than the body strictly requires. And the winter's surplus of sleep is one of the season's few allowances to the body that has been working hard in the cold. More time horizontal, more time in the warm pocket, more time in the dark, doing the necessary work of the sleeping body. The straw tick tells its own story. You are lying on straw, or on hay, or on the more prestigious contents of a better household's mattress, wool fibres that have not been spun, or feathers from the geese that were slaughtered in the autumn, or the down from the same geese packed into a cloth cover that sits on top of the straw tick as a supplementary layer. The aristocratic household has feather beds. The peasant household has straw, and the straw has its virtues. It gives some warmth. It gives some softness. It yields to the body's shape over time, and it has to be changed periodically as it compacts and loses its air content and becomes more like a hard floor and less like a mattress. Fresh straw in the tick is a luxury of the season's end. Late winter straw is the straw of many months of sleeping on it, compressed and flattened, providing less cushion and less insulation, than it did in September. The sleeping body is working. This is the thing that is easy to forget in the context of the cold and the management of it. The sleeping body is not doing nothing. The sleeping body is doing the consolidation of the day's physical work into the muscles that did it, the strengthening of the tissues that were used and slightly damaged by use, the processing of the day's experience into the memory's long storage, the growth in the children's case, the repair in all cases. Sleep is the body's maintenance window, the period when everything that was used hard in the waking hours is being assessed and addressed, and the sleep in the cold house is not less effective for being cold. Cold itself is not the enemy of sleep. Cold simply sets the terms under which sleep happens, the same terms that the body has always known. You sleep on it anyway. The body adapts to the surface over time, learns the hard places and avoids them, finds the positions that work and keeps them. You do not have the language of lumbar support or pressure points. You have the body's own knowledge of where it hurts to sleep and where it does not, and you have arranged yourself accordingly, the particular curve of your spine against the particular terrain of this Tickon arrangement arrived at over years. Then there are the nights when ordinary management is not sufficient. Not every winter night in February is the same winter night. The winter has its range. The nights that are merely cold, the January cold that is unpleasant but manageable with the usual arrangements, and then the nights that are something else. The nights when the frost sets in hard before midnight, and the temperature drops past the point that the usual arrangements address. The nights when you can feel the cold coming through the thatch, when the wall nearest the outside feels different to the touch, when the water left in the cup beside the bed is ice by morning. These are the nights when everything changes, not the strategy, which remains the same. More bodies, more layers, the fire as hot as it can be before banking, but the intensity of the application, the degree to which every element of the warmth system is pushed to its limit. On the extreme cold nights, the pig comes inside. This is not a metaphor. The pig, the large pig that weighs perhaps as much as a person and produces the body heat of something that weighs as much as a person, is brought from the sty in the yard and installed in the house, its warmth added to the household's warmth calculation as a simple material fact. The pig does not care about sleeping arrangements. The pig sleeps where it is told to sleep, which is near the wall where its body will help hold the cold at bay. The children are put in the same bed as the adults on the extreme nights. Under ordinary cold, the children have their own sleeping arrangement, a pallet near the parents' bed, or the foot of the same bed, or the truckle bed that slides out from beneath the main bed when the night requires it. On the extreme nights, the truckle goes back under, and the children are in the main bed, the bodies of the family compressed into the one space where the most warmth can be generated and held, the covers pulled over all of them, the warmth of 5 or 6 bodies under a shared covering producing something considerably more than the sum of its parts. The outside world on those nights is doing something extraordinary. You cannot see it from the bed. The shutters are closed, the house sealed against the dark and the cold, and the outside world is on the other side of the walls and the thatch and the sealed gap of the door. But you can hear it. The extreme cold has its own sounds. The wind has dropped, often on the hardest frost nights, the cold air settling without movement, the absence of wind making the cold seem more complete, more absolute, the silence of a world that is being held completely still by its own temperature. The trees in the wood at the edge of the field contract in the cold and make sharp cracking sounds that carry across the frozen air from a surprising distance. The sound of timber under cold stress that would be alarming if you did not know what it was, that you do know what it is, and that knowledge makes it ordinary. In this configuration, the bed is very warm. Even on the extreme nights, in this configuration, the bed is warm. The weight of the covers is considerable, the bodies below them holding them up off the skin, so the weight is the weight of wool and not the pressure of wool. And the warmth generated by 5 people sharing a small space under a collective cover is the warmth of a thing that is trying and largely succeeding. The faces above the covers are cold. The ears are cold. The nose is cold in the way that makes you tuck it down into the covers and breathe the slightly stale warm air under them rather than the fresh cold air above them, accepting the trade. The stars on extreme cold nights are extraordinary. You cannot see them from the bed, but you have seen them from outside, from the brief transit from the house to the outbuilding, from the moment before the door closes behind you, from the instant that the darkness and the cold receive you, and you look up before you have time to look away. The sky on a deep frost night is the sky from which all moisture has been removed, the air dry and clear, and holding nothing between your eye and the stars, therefore, at their most numerous and their most precise, sharp points of light against the absolute black, more of them visible than on any temperate night, the faint smear of the winter band of the galaxy visible across the zenith, if you know to look for it and wait for your eyes to adjust to the dark. You will survive this night. Not every night in February is survived. The very old, the very young, the already weakened, the winter takes some of them in some years, the extreme cold finding the body that does not have enough reserve, the body that has been stretched too thin by too long a winter, that has no more warmth left to generate. The household knows this. The household has known it since before anyone in it was born, has known it as a fact of the winter, the way it knows the darkness and the cold themselves, as things that are real and that can be survived by the healthy and the careful and that take the others. Cold and clear and very still. This is the world outside on the extreme nights, while inside the house the bodies are pressed together under the covers, and the pig is against the wall, and the banked fire is doing everything a banked fire can do. The world outside and the world inside are on either side of a wall that is doing its job, imperfectly, as all walls do, the cold seeping through at the joints and the gaps and the places where the daub has cracked, but doing it, holding the outside outside and the inside inside, the inside being the warm and the breathing and the living. You are healthy and careful. You have been careful in the ways this house has always been careful. The fire banked right, the children inside the warmth, the stores adequate, the sick tended, the old given the warmest place near the fire in the evening, and the warmest place in the bed at night. You have been doing what the household has always done, applying the accumulated knowledge of winters survived to this winter, this night, this particular depth of cold. The bed is warm enough. The baby wakes. In the cradle near the fire, in the hour before dawn, in the coldest part of the night. The fire has been down since the middle of the night tending, and the room has cooled again. The baby wakes and makes its sound. The sound is not yet a cry. It is the preliminary of a cry, the small escalating sound that is the baby's way of reporting conditions before it commits to the full alarm, the vocalization of discomfort that has not yet tipped into the vocalization of distress. The sound reaches the mother whose sleep is the lightest sleep in the bed, because the mother's sleep has been calibrated to this sound from the night the baby arrived. The nervous system trained to surface at this particular frequency and no other. She is out of the bed before fully awake. This is what the calibration produces: movement before consciousness, action before decision, the body responding to the child's sound with the directness of something that has been practiced so many times, it no longer requires the mind's authorization. She crosses the cold floor quickly, lifts the child, returns to the bed, and the child is warm against her, and the warmth of the bed is around both of them, and the baby's sound stops as the warmth and the closeness stop the discomfort that produced the sound. The cold was reaching the baby in the cradle. The cradle near the fire is warm when the fire is warm, and less warm when the fire has been down for 3 hours, and the baby, who has no means of adjusting its own covers and no means of generating the additional heat of movement or the additional layers of clothing, is the most vulnerable person in this house on a February night, the most dependent on the fire and on the adult who tends the fire and on the blanket that covers the cradle and on the arrangement of the whole household's warmth-making being pointed in the right direction. She holds the child. The child against the mother's body is a complete solution. It is the oldest solution, the solution that predates every other technology of warmth. The covers, the fire, the thatch, the animal companions, the solution that is simply the warmth of one body given freely to a smaller body that cannot yet generate enough of its own. The child's temperature rises quickly. The small face relaxes. The mother's temperature is unchanged because her body has warmth to spare, because the mother giving warmth to the child costs the mother nothing she cannot afford in the warm bed on this night. She sleeps again. Before dawn, the household begins its movement back toward wakefulness, the second sleep loosening as the grey light, not visible yet through the shuttered window, but present in the sky outside, the darkness softening, begins its slow assertion over the night. The body knows this too, the approach of light before light arrives, the internal clock having calibrated itself to the season in the same way it has calibrated itself to the cold, accurately from the inside, without consulting anything outside itself. The children are the last to wake. Children in a warm bed in a cold room find the transition from sleep to waking particularly resistant. The warm pocket holding them down, the room beyond the covers making a strong argument for remaining inside the covers. You have to call them, or shake them, or in the worst cases, drag the covers back and let the cold of the room make its own argument, which it does efficiently. The cold makes the argument with the speed and the thoroughness of a very cold room in February, and the argument is persuasive in the way that only the unavoidable is persuasive. There is nothing left to do but get up. They get up. The morning in the cold house begins with the fire, not with food, not with the day's work, not with any of the other tasks that the morning requires, with the fire, always with the fire first, as it was the fire first, every morning before this one, and will be every morning after. You go to the hearth, and you look at what was left of the banked coals, and you determine whether there is enough to catch on, or whether this is the morning when the flint and steel must come out, and the tinder must be coaxed. The longer and colder morning process of starting from nothing rather than from the coals that made it through. The coals have made it through. This is the relief of a winter morning, smaller than it sounds unless you know the alternative, which you do. The mornings when the coals are dead, and the room is at its coldest, and the fire must be started from nothing, in hands that are not yet warm enough for the fine work of the flint and tinder. Those mornings are the mornings that test the household's patience most thoroughly, when the tinder catches and goes out and catches again, and the smoke rises before the flame, and the cold hands fumble, and the children are cold and hungry, and the whole apparatus of the morning is delayed by the fire that should have been there and is not. The tinder is kept dry. This matters more than almost anything about the fire, more than the quality of the wood or the skill of the banking, because the tinder is the only thing that catches the spark from the flint and steel and becomes the first tiny flame that all the rest of the fire depends on, and tinder that is damp from the house's own moisture, from the breath of the sleeping bodies, from the cold air from outside, meeting the warmer air inside. Damp tinder will not catch, or will catch and go out, or will smoulder without producing the flame that can be moved to the waiting kindling. The tinder box lives close to the fire. The tinder box, a small wooden or metal container whose purpose is entirely to keep the tinder dry and ready, whose whole existence is the problem of moisture in a house where moisture is everywhere, lives on the shelf near the hearth, or in the corner near the hearth where the warmth of the fire keeps it above the condensing temperature. Box is opened every morning with the assessment of a person who knows that what is inside it is everything, the charred cloth or dried fungus or fine dried grass that will catch a spark, the fine kindling laid beside it, the slightly larger kindling beyond that, the wood beyond that. The whole sequence is here, ready, arranged in the order that fire requires. On the coals so it bridges them, and on the coals so it bridges them, and catches from both sides. And you watch the flame come. It comes tentatively, as fire always comes in the cold, as though it too is waking from its banked state, testing the air, finding its confidence. Then it is there, properly there, the wood burning properly, and the heat reaching you on your knees at the hearth, and the light of it pushing the grey of the early morning back toward the walls. The wood that feeds the morning fire came from the woodpile, and the woodpile is one of the winter's constant subjects of attention. The woodpile is to the winter what the grain in the storage pit is to the diet. The material provision against the season's length, the accumulation made in the months of easier work against the months when work is harder and provision is everything. You knew this autumn that a full woodpile meant a winter of good fires, of fires that could be generous in the evening and still afford the banking that would carry through to morning. A poor woodpile means rationing, means smaller fires, means fires banked earlier in the evening when the wood would have given another hour's warmth if there had been more of it. The woodpile is adequate this winter. The coppicing was done in spring, the poles cut from the managed woodland in the rotation that the village has observed for longer than anyone can remember. The hazel and the ash and the willow cut back to their stools and left to regrow. The poles taken to the yard and stacked to dry through the summer. The larger pieces, the oak for the sustained burns, were split in autumn. The kindling is the small stuff, the twigs and the thin splits, kept separately in a dry corner where the children know not to disturb it. The hierarchy of the firewood understood by everyone in the household from the age at which the fire was explained to them. The morning fire grows. The room begins its slow warming. Not quickly. The room has been cold for 6 hours, and warming it is not the work of 10 minutes, but of an hour. But perceptibly, the air near the fire warming first, and the warmth moving outward through the room by the slow mechanism of convection, the warmer air rising and the cooler air filling in beneath it, and the room turning its cycle until everything is slightly warmer than it was, slightly less cold. The margin between the room and the body reduced from the hard margin of the deep night to the softer margin of a morning with a fire going. You bring the water to heat for the morning's ale. The water from the bucket near the door, which has a skin of ice on it this morning, February, the bucket near the door, is broken with a knuckle and poured into the pot that goes on the fire, and the fire takes the pot, and the pot takes the water, and the water will be warm in the time it takes to get the children up and give everyone the task of dressing and gather around the fire that is becoming incrementally a source of warmth rather than simply a source of light. The ice in the bucket is ordinary. You look at it and you break it and you pour the water, and you do not think about the ice except as something to break. This is what ordinary means. The things that are always there do not announce themselves, do not require interpretation, do not prompt the thought, "This is remarkable." The ice in the bucket in February is as ordinary as the bucket itself, as ordinary as the cold floor under your feet, as ordinary as the grey light coming through the gap in the shutter. February is February. The ice is what February does. The household gathers. The gathering at the fire in the morning is the same gathering as the gathering at the fire in the evening, the same bodies in the same small space around the same warmth, but it is a different quality of gathering. The evening fire is the fire of rest, of the day completed, of the household arriving at the fire from the outward world. The morning fire is the fire of beginning, of the household preparing itself to leave the warmth and go back out into what February has today. Nobody is eager to go out. This is the other thing about the morning fire, the other thing about the warmth that has been so carefully built and maintained through the night. Leaving it is not easy. The children, pulled from the bed and dressed in the cold room and brought to the fire's warmth, understand immediately and viscerally that the warmth is here and the outside is not here, and going outside means leaving the warmth, and every child at the fire on a February morning has the same relationship to that fact. Reluctance, resistance, the body's preference made clear without requiring words. The adults have the same preference. The adults have simply had longer to understand that the preference does not govern the day, that the animals in the yard need feeding in February as they need feeding in July, that the field's work waits for no fire, however good the fire is, that the preference for warmth is a preference that can be noted and set aside and acted against in the way that all preferences that conflict with necessity must be noted and set aside and acted against. You hold your hands out to the fire one more time. The hands, which have been cold since they left the warm pocket of the bed, receive the fire's radiation and begin their slow return to usefulness. The fingers uncurl. The stiffness retreats. The fine motor function that the cold had reduced comes back degree by degree, the hands becoming themselves again, becoming the hands that will work today, that will do what the day requires. You turn them over and let the fire have the backs of them, the less often warmed side, the side that works hardest and is repaid least often. The cold is still in the room. The fire is warming it, will warm it. But right now the cold is still in the room, and the bodies around the fire are receiving the fire's warmth on their front faces, while their backs remain in the room's cold. The familiar experience of the winter fire. One side warm, one side cold. The rotation of the body toward the heat when the cold side becomes uncomfortable. The small, constant management of proximity and orientation. The ale is heating. The morning ale, warming in the pot over the newly established fire, is the morning's first provision, the liquid warmth that the body receives before the bread, the thing that is hot rather than merely not cold, that carries its heat directly into the chest and spreads from there. You wrap your hands around the wooden cup and feel the warmth of it through your palms, and you drink it slowly, letting the heat settle into you, the hot liquid doing quickly what the fire has been doing slowly, the warmth of it arriving at the stomach and dispersing from there into the surrounding body. This is the moment that is almost enough. The cup in the hands, the fire in front of you, the ale doing its work in the chest, the household around you waking to its day. This is the moment that is almost enough compensation for the night, for the cold and the management of the cold and the disrupted sleep, and the getting up in the dark to tend the fire and the cold floor and the grey morning. Almost enough. Not quite enough to make you want to stay here rather than go out, but almost. You eat the bread from yesterday or the day before, the rye bread that is the morning's meal and that will fill the body for the cold work ahead. You eat it by the fire, and you are fed and warm at the center, and the day has not yet asked anything of you, and for a few minutes longer you stay here, in the fire's radius, in the warmth that the whole night's careful work of banking and covering and gathering and tucking has kept alive until this morning, this fire, this cup. Then you go out. You are cold. You are always cold in February until the fire has had its time, until the room has warmed to the fire's level, until the body's own generation of warmth has added itself to the fire's, and the room has become what the room becomes when enough warm things are in it long enough. But you are here. This is the morning's fact, arrived at through the night's management, through the accumulated technology of warmth that is not dramatic and is not modern and does not involve anything more sophisticated than wool and straw and banked coals and other bodies in the same bed. You are here, warm at the center, cold at the edges, alive in February, the fire growing, the day beginning. The shutters are opened. The grey light of a February morning comes in, pale and thin, the light of a season that is still 2 months from committing to warmth, still conserving itself, still the light of a sun that is low on its arc and far from the land, and giving what it has to give, in the understanding that what it has to give is not much. The light falls on the faces around the fire, on the children's faces, flushed from the warmth of the bed and the proximity of the fire, on the bread in the hands, on the fire itself, the flames reduced to the lesser brightness of morning daylight. The cold comes in with the light. You close the shutter part way. The day will determine what the shutter does. A bright day, a day with sun, might allow the shutter open and even allow some warmth from it, the weak February sun warming the south-facing wall enough to add something to the room's temperature. A grey day, a day of no sun, keeps the shutter where it is. The cold held at bay by the wood and the thatch and the fire and the bodies and everything that the household has learned over generations of February about keeping the cold on the other side of the wall. The fire burns, the room warms, the ale is drunk, the bread is eaten. The household puts on everything it will wear today and goes out into the February morning, out of the warmth that was so carefully built and so carefully maintained through the long cold night, out into the cold that was held at the walls all night and is waiting now on the other side of the door, patient, absolute, the cold of the season, doing what it always does, which is simply to be the cold of the season for as long as the season lasts. The cold outside is entirely different from the cold inside. The cold inside the house, even at its worst, is the managed cold. The cold that the fire and the bodies and the thatch have been working against all night. The cold that has been held at its level by the effort of the household's warmth-making. The cold outside the door is the unmanaged cold. The cold that has had all night to do exactly what cold does when nothing opposes it, which is to become itself completely, to settle into the ground and the wood and the stone and the air, and to be the cold without modification or apology. You feel it as a wall. When the door opens on a February morning and the outside air comes in and the inside air goes out and the exchange happens all at once, the body's response is immediate and total. The skin contracts, the shoulders come up, the hands go into fists inside whatever covers the wrists. The cold is not a sensation experienced gradually. It is a condition encountered all at once, the outside world presenting itself fully and without introduction. You go out into it anyway. The animals need feeding. The water in the trough needs breaking. The ice that formed overnight over whatever water was in the trough needs the heel of the boot or the handle of the tool to break it open so the animals can drink. The fire inside the house that you just left will keep the house warming while you are out. The day's work is out here, in this cold, in this morning, in the particular quality of February light that is neither the darkness of the night nor the warmth of the summer, but something in between, a light that provides enough to work by without providing enough to be pleasant. The day goes on, and then the day ends, as all days end, with the return to the house and the fire and the gathering of the household in the fire's warmth. The evening that is the same evening as last evening and the evening before that. The same fire, the same bench, the same food, the same slow progression toward the banking and the bed. This is the winter. Not any single night, but all the nights together. The long sequence of them from November through to the first week of March, when the quality of the cold begins to shift, begins to admit the possibility that the season is not endless, that the wheel is still turning, even when the cold has been so constant for so long that the turning has been impossible to feel. The wheel is always turning. The cold that feels absolute in February is already on its way to becoming the cold of early March, which is the cold that can be borne, which is the cold that admits gaps of warmth in the afternoon, which is the cold that does not prevent the earliest bulbs from pushing through the frozen ground with a stubbornness that is also the stubbornness of the household at the fire on a February night.